Take a slow, comfortable breath. Allow your shoulders to relax and let the busy moments of the day drift gently into the distance. Tonight, there is nowhere you need to be and nothing you need to solve. There is only a quiet road stretching across the American Southwest, where the evening sun is slowly sinking beyond warm desert hills, and the first stars are patiently waiting for their turn to appear. Far from crowded highways and glowing city skylines, there is a place that almost never appears on maps. Travelers rarely arrive there by accident, and those who do often remember it for the rest of their lives. Not because something extraordinary happened, but because, for the first time in a very long while, they experienced complete silence. The little village is called Starlight Wells. It rests peacefully between gentle sandstone hills, endless stretches of golden desert, and fields of towering saguaro cacti that have quietly watched over the land for centuries. During the day, warm sunlight paints everything in soft shades of gold and amber. At night, the desert transforms into one of the darkest and clearest places in America, where the Milky Way stretches across the heavens like a glowing river. The people who live here do not hurry. The bakery opens with the sunrise. The post office closes before dusk. Neighbors greet one another by name. Even conversations seem to move at a slower pace, as though time itself has decided to rest here for a while. No one comes to Starlight Wells looking for excitement. They come searching for quiet. And sometimes, without even realizing it, they discover something even more valuable. They discover peace. On a warm autumn afternoon, a silver pickup truck traveled along a narrow desert road leading toward the village. Dust rose gently behind its tires before disappearing into the soft breeze. The road curved between weathered rocks and ancient cacti, each one standing like a silent guardian beneath the enormous sky. Inside the truck sat Dr. Samuel Carter. At 72 years old, Samuel no longer counted distances by miles. He measured journeys by sunrises, by conversations shared over warm tea, by evenings spent watching the stars. His silver-white hair caught the fade-in sunlight whenever the truck rounded another gentle bend. Resting on the passenger seat beside him was a worn leather notebook, its pages filled with careful handwriting, sketches of constellations, and reflections gathered over a lifetime beneath countless night skies. For more than 40 years, Samuel had studied the universe. He had worked inside famous observatories. He had written scientific papers. He had spoken before crowded lecture halls filled with students eager to understand the stars. Yet, somewhere along the way, he had begun to miss something surprisingly simple. Silence. Not the silence inside libraries. Not the silence that follows applause. But the living silence of nature, where the wind speaks softly through open land, where evenings arrive without announcement, and where darkness is welcomed instead of avoided. When Samuel retired, many of his colleagues imagined he would move closer to family or settle in a comfortable neighborhood near the city. Instead, he searched for the darkest skies he could find. For months, he studied maps. He read old travel journals. He spoke with park rangers, photographers, and amateur astronomers. Again and again, one tiny place quietly appeared in his notes. Starlight Wells. Population, fewer than 200. Nearest highway, more than 30 miles away. Streetlights, almost none. Night sky, unforgettable. That was enough. As the afternoon slowly drifted toward evening, Samuel rolled down the truck's window. Warm desert air flowed gently inside. It carried the faint scent of dry earth, sun-warmed stone, and distant sagebrush. He smiled. It had been many years since air had smelled this clean. Above him, a pair of red-tailed hawks circled effortlessly on invisible currents of warm air. Far away, layered sandstone cliffs glowed softly beneath the lowering sun, their colors shifting from gold to orange, and finally to deep crimson. Everything around him seemed wonderfully unhurried. The farther he drove, the quieter the world became. There were no billboards, no crowded intersections, no endless lines of cars, only the winding road, the whisper of the breeze, and the endless sky stretching farther than imagination. Samuel reached over and gently touched the cover of his notebook. Inside, on the very first page, he had written a single sentence before leaving his old home that morning. Perhaps the greatest discoveries are not found by looking farther into the universe, but by learning to look more gently at the world around us. He had smiled when writing those words. Now, surrounded by the quiet beauty of the desert, they felt even more true. The sun slowly descended toward the western horizon, painting long shadows across the open land. Somewhere ahead, beyond the next line of gentle hills, Starlight Wells was waiting. And with it, a slower rhythm of life, new friendships, quiet evenings beneath endless stars, and a journey that would change Samuel Carter in ways even a lifetime spent studying the heavens could never have predicted. As the truck continued along the peaceful road, the first evening star quietly appeared above the desert. Samuel noticed it immediately. He always did. A warm smile crossed his face. Then, almost in a whisper, meant only for himself, he said, "Good evening. I've been looking forward to seeing you." The road carried him onward into the fading light, while the sky, little by little, began to fill with stars. The evening unfolded with remarkable patience. The sun had almost disappeared beyond the distant sandstone ridges, leaving behind a sky brushed with soft shades of amber, rose, and fading lavender. The light no longer felt bright. Instead, it rested gently upon the desert, as though wishing to linger a few moments longer before night quietly took its place. Samuel continued along the narrow road, driving a little more slowly than before. There was no reason to hurry. For the first time in many years, no meeting waited on his calendar. No lecture hall expected him. No telescope schedule needed to be followed before dawn. The only thing waiting ahead was a village he had never seen, yet somehow already felt connected to. A weathered wooden sign finally appeared beside the road. Its paint had faded under countless summers, but the carved letters remained easy to read. "Welcome to Starlight Wells, where every night begins with wonder." Samuel smiled as he passed beneath it. The road became narrower, lined with old mesquite trees whose branches bent gently toward one another, forming a quiet arch over the entrance to the village. The first homes soon appeared. They were small adobe cottages with whitewashed walls and blue-painted shutters. Wide porches wrapped around the front of each house, where rocking chairs sat waiting for the cool evening breeze. Clay flower pots rested beside wooden doors. Small lanterns had begun to glow with a warm golden light. There were no fences separating neighbors, only winding footpaths and carefully tended gardens filled with desert wildflowers, rosemary, lavender, and blooming cacti. Everything looked simple. Everything looked cared for. Samuel noticed something else. Almost every porch was occupied. An elderly couple shared tea while watching the sunset. 2 children laughed quietly as they chased one another without shouting. A young father gently rocked a sleeping baby beneath a cottonwood tree. No one seemed distracted. No one stared at a glowing screen. Instead, everyone seemed to be paying attention to the evening itself. Samuel lowered the truck's speed even more, not because the road demanded it, because the village invited it. Near the center of Starlight Wells stood a modest stone square. A small fountain rested in the middle, its water flowing so softly that it sounded more like a distant stream than a fountain. Nearby stood a bakery, its windows glowing warmly from within. The sweet scent of fresh bread drifted through the cool desert air. Samuel realized he had not smelled bread baked in a traditional stone oven for many years. Across the square stood a tiny grocery store, a post office with a bright red mailbox, and a modest community hall built from local sandstone. Nothing about the village tried to impress visitors. Its beauty came from something quieter. It simply belonged exactly where it was. Samuel parked beside the square and stepped out of the truck. The evening air had cooled pleasantly. A gentle breeze brushed against his face, carrying with it the scent of warm bread, dry earth, and blooming desert flowers. He closed the truck door softly. For a long moment, he simply listened. No engines, no distant sirens, no humming power lines. Only the fountain, the breeze, a bird settling into a nearby tree, and somewhere beyond the village, the soft call of an owl welcoming the coming night. Samuel took a slow breath. "This," he whispered to himself, "is exactly what I hoped to find." Just then, the bakery door opened. A woman with kind grey eyes and flour, lightly dusting her apron, stepped outside, carrying a woven basket covered with a linen cloth. She noticed Samuel immediately. Instead of asking who he was or why he had come, she offered the warm smile that seemed so natural in Starlight Wells. "You must be Dr. Carter," she said gently. "My name is Eleanor Brooks." Her voice was calm, warm, and welcoming. Samuel nodded with a grateful smile. "I suppose news travels quickly here." Eleanor laughed softly. "It usually reaches the bakery before anywhere else." The sound of her laughter blended naturally with the quiet evening. It wasn't loud. It wasn't hurried. It simply became another peaceful note in the village's evening melody. "I baked a fresh loaf this afternoon," Eleanor continued, lifting the basket slightly. "I thought our newest neighbor shouldn't spend his first evening without warm bread." Samuel looked at the basket, then back at Eleanor. Such kindness was unexpected. And yet, it somehow felt completely ordinary here. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "I don't quite know what to say." "You don't have to say much," Eleanor replied with another gentle smile. "People here have learned that peaceful company is often better than long conversations." Together, they walked slowly across the square toward Samuel's cottage, which stood only a short distance away. As they walked, Eleanor pointed out the places they passed. "The grocery opens just after sunrise. The post office closes before supper. Every Friday evening, most of the village gathers in the square. There isn't much excitement." She paused, smiling toward the darkening sky. "But there is always something beautiful to notice." Samuel followed her gaze upward. Above the western horizon, the first handful of stars had already appeared. Bright, steady, unhurried. He instinctively recognized Venus shining low in the sky. A little higher, he could already make out Arcturus, patiently waiting for the darkness to deepen. Eleanor noticed his expression. "You've spent your life studying the stars," she said. Samuel nodded. "I have." She smiled. "Then I think you'll enjoy meeting ours." Samuel looked at her curiously. "Ours?" Eleanor's eyes sparkled with quiet amusement. "You'll understand after your first full night." She offered no further explanation. There was no mystery in her voice, only the gentle confidence of someone sharing a favorite part of home. They reached a small adobe cottage with white walls glowing softly beneath the last light of sunset. Blue wooden shutters framed each window. 2 rocking chairs rested quietly on the porch. Tiny wind chimes hanging beside the front door stirred gently in the evening breeze, creating a delicate melody that seemed to belong to the desert itself. Samuel stood silently for several moments. He looked at the porch, the lantern beside the door, the little cactus garden, the endless sky slowly growing darker overhead. After years spent observing distant galaxies through powerful telescopes, he found himself smiling at something much closer. A simple home, waiting peacefully beneath the stars. For a few quiet moments, Samuel remained standing on the porch. The evening had settled gently over Starlight Wells. The last ribbon of orange had faded from the western horizon, leaving behind a sky that grew deeper and richer with every passing minute. One by one, the stars awakened, not all at once, but with the same calm patience that seemed to guide everything in the village. A soft breeze wandered through the cactus garden, touching the tiny wind chimes beside the front door. The delicate melody was so gentle that it almost disappeared into the silence. Samuel slipped the old brass key into the lock and opened the door. The cottage welcomed him with the comforting scent of cedar wood, old books, and sun-dried clay. Nothing inside felt luxurious, yet everything felt thoughtfully placed. A stone fireplace rested against one wall. A woven rug lay across the wooden floor. Shelves filled with well-loved books surrounded a comfortable reading chair beside the window. In the small kitchen, polished copper kettles hung neatly above a wooden counter, and a clay teapot waited beside a row of simple ceramic cups. Near the fireplace stood a small writing desk. Samuel smiled. It was exactly the sort of desk where quiet thoughts preferred to become words. He carefully carried his suitcase inside, placing it beside the bedroom door. He unpacked only a few things. His favorite wool blanket, a framed photograph of his late wife, Margaret, smiling beneath a summer sky many years ago, his leather notebook, and a small brass compass that had accompanied him on countless research journeys across the country. The photograph remained in his hands a little longer. Margaret had loved the night sky almost as much as he did. Although she had never become an astronomer, she had spent years traveling beside him, patiently waiting through long nights while he observed distant galaxies. She often reminded him of something he sometimes forgot. Forgot. "Samuel," she would say with a warm smile, "don't spend so much time searching for beautiful things that you forget to enjoy the ones already beside you." He gently placed her photograph on the writing desk. The room somehow felt warmer. Outside, the breeze continued its slow conversation with the wind chimes. Samuel opened one of the cottage windows. Cool desert air drifted inside. It carried the faint fragrance of sagebrush and dry earth that had finally released the warmth gathered throughout the day. Somewhere nearby, A night bird called softly. Then silence returned. Not an empty silence, a peaceful one, the kind that allows every small sound to be heard. He walked into the kitchen and placed Eleanor's warm loaf of bread on the wooden counter. When he unfolded the linen cloth, the comforting aroma immediately filled the cottage. Fresh rosemary, butter, a hint of honey. He sliced a small piece, poured himself a cup of hot chamomile tea, and carried both onto the front porch. The rocking chair creaked quietly as he sat down. The wood felt smooth beneath his hands, polished by many years of quiet evenings. He took a slow sip of tea. Warm, gentle, exactly right for the cool desert night. Across the village, lanterns glowed softly beside front doors. Families spoke in low voices. Some laughed quietly. Others simply sat together without speaking at all. There seemed to be no pressure to fill every moment with conversation. Silence here was not awkward. It was shared. Samuel found himself breathing more slowly than he had in months, perhaps years. Above him, the stars continued appearing. Dozens became hundreds. Hundreds became thousands. Then, almost without noticing when it happened, the entire sky transformed. The Milky Way stretched from one horizon to the other, like a silver river flowing across the heavens. Samuel had witnessed beautiful skies throughout his career. He had stood beneath frozen mountain peaks, remote islands, national parks, observatories far above the clouds. Yet this sky felt different. Not because it contained more stars, because nothing competed with them. No city lights, no flashing signs, no distant glow rising from crowded highways. Only darkness, gentle, pure, and filled with light. He leaned back in the rocking chair. Without thinking, he began identifying familiar constellations: Cassiopeia, Cygnus, Aquila. Then, lower in the eastern sky, he noticed Saturn glowing with its steady golden light. He smiled softly. Old friends, still exactly where they had always been. Just then, footsteps approached along the quiet path. Samuel turned to see Matteo Rivera walking slowly toward the porch. The observatory caretaker removed his wide-brimmed hat with an easy smile. "Good evening, Dr. Carter." "Please," Samuel replied warmly. "Call me Samuel." Matteo nodded. "Then you must call me Matteo." He carried a small wooden box, tied neatly with twine. "I thought you might like these." Samuel accepted the box with quiet curiosity. Inside rested several carefully polished eyepieces for an old brass telescope. "They belonged to the observatory," Matteo explained. "I cleaned them this morning. I had a feeling they'd soon have someone who truly appreciated them." Samuel lifted one carefully into the lantern light. The brass edges had been polished until they gleamed softly. Someone had cared for them with remarkable patience. "They're beautiful," Samuel said. Matteo smiled. "The telescope has been waiting too." Samuel looked up. "Waiting?" "For someone who still enjoys looking slowly." The two men shared a gentle laugh. Neither felt the need to say much more. After a comfortable silence, Matteo looked toward the brilliant sky above the village. "Tomorrow evening," he said quietly, "if you'd like, I'll show you the observatory." "I would enjoy that very much." Matteo tipped his hat once more before continuing along the peaceful lane. His footsteps faded into the night until only the breeze remained. Samuel looked down at the old telescope eyepieces resting in his hands. He realized something. Back in the city, people often gave one another expensive gifts. Here, they offered time, fresh bread, quiet conversation, a place beside the stars. He gently placed the eyepieces on the small table beside his chair and lifted his eyes toward the heavens once again. The village had grown almost completely silent now. Only the wind moved. Only the stars shone. Only the night continued its slow and endless unfolding. Samuel whispered so softly that even the breeze almost carried the words away. "I think I've finally come home." Above him, the stars answered in the only way they knew, by quietly continuing to shine. The night passed quietly. Samuel slept more peacefully than he had in many years. There were no distant sirens, no traffic drifting through an open window, no restless city lights pressing against the darkness. Only the gentle whisper of the desert breeze and the occasional song of a night bird far beyond the village. Long before sunrise, Samuel opened his eyes naturally. For a moment, he simply listened. The cottage was still. Outside, the world seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the first light of a new day. He wrapped a light wool sweater over his shoulders and stepped onto the porch, carrying a warm cup of tea in both hands. The air felt wonderfully cool. Above him, the stars still filled the sky. They had not yet begun to fade. The Milky Way stretched quietly overhead, while a thin silver crescent moon rested low above the western hills. Samuel smiled. This had always been his favorite hour, the peaceful space between night and morning. He settled into one of the rocking chairs and watched the eastern horizon. At first, nothing changed. Then, almost too gently to notice, a pale ribbon of blue appeared above the distant desert. A few minutes later, it became lavender, then soft pink, then warm gold. The stars slowly surrendered their place to the approaching day. Not all at once, one by one, patiently, gracefully. Samuel had spent decades studying how stars were born, how they lived, and how they eventually faded over unimaginable stretches of time. Yet watching them disappear before sunrise never felt like an ending. It felt like a promise, a quiet reminder that they would always return. He opened his leather notebook and wrote only a single sentence. Every sunrise teaches the stars how to say goodbye without ever truly leaving. He closed the notebook gently. Some thoughts needed nothing more. As the first rays of sunlight reached the village, starlight wells slowly awakened. A rooster crowed somewhere beyond the village square. The bakery chimney released a thin trail of smoke into the crisp morning air. Small desert sparrows fluttered between flowering cactus plants, filling the silence with cheerful songs. The wind carried the comforting aroma of fresh bread. Samuel laughed softly. "I suppose that's my invitation." He walked toward the village square at an easy pace, greeting the few early risers with warm smiles. An elderly man, watering his roses, tipped his straw hat. A young woman arranging flowers outside her porch waved as though Samuel had lived there for years. No one seemed rushed. Even the morning felt relaxed. When Samuel reached the bakery, the front door stood open. Warm light spilled onto the quiet street. Inside, shelves were filled with golden loaves, cinnamon rolls, fresh biscuits, and fruit pastries that filled the room with the rich scent of butter and warm flour. Eleanor looked up from the counter and smiled. "I had a feeling you'd be awake before the sun." Samuel chuckled. "Old habits are difficult to leave behind." "They're not always meant to be left behind," Eleanor replied. She poured a cup of fresh coffee while placing a warm apple pastry onto a small ceramic plate. "No charge?" Samuel raised an eyebrow. You'll discover something about this village, Eleanor said with a gentle smile. Today someone shares breakfast with you. Tomorrow you might help someone repair a fence. The next day you may sit beside a neighbor who's feeling lonely. It all balances in the end. Samuel nodded thoughtfully. I like that. Eleanor carried her own cup of tea to the table beside the window. For several quiet minutes, they simply watched the village awaken. Children walked toward the small schoolhouse, carrying colorful backpacks. The mail carrier unlocked the post office. A shepherd led a handful of sheep beyond the eastern fields. Everything happened slowly enough that each moment could be appreciated. Finally, Eleanor broke the silence. Matteo will probably come by after breakfast. He never misses an opportunity to visit the observatory. Almost on cue, the bakery bell chimed softly. Matteo stepped inside, removing his hat with the same easy smile Samuel had seen the evening before. "Good morning." "Good morning," Samuel replied warmly. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Eleanor answered. "I've already guessed why you're here." Matteo laughed. "Guilty?" He turned toward Samuel. "If you're ready, I thought we could take a walk up to the observatory before the afternoon grows warm." Samuel's eyes brightened. "I've been looking forward to it since yesterday." They finished breakfast without hurry. Outside, the morning sun had climbed just high enough to bathe the sandstone hills in warm, golden light. The observatory stood on a gentle rise beyond the village, its round stone dome visible against the brilliant blue sky. From below, it seemed both humble and timeless. As Samuel and Matteo began walking along the winding trail, a small figure sat beneath a mesquite tree near the path. She appeared to be sketching something in a notebook, balanced carefully across her knees. Her long brown hair moved softly in the breeze beneath a wide straw hat. She looked up as the two men approached. "Good morning, Mr. Matteo." "Good morning, Lily." Samuel noticed pages filled with careful pencil drawings. Not flowers, not houses, constellations, each one labeled with neat handwriting, each star placed with remarkable care. Lily smiled politely at Samuel. "You must be Dr. Carter." Samuel smiled back. "I am." "My teacher said you spent your whole life studying the stars. I've certainly spent a great deal of time looking at them." Lily closed her notebook carefully. "I'd like to learn their stories someday." Samuel glanced at Matteo, who quietly smiled, as though this meeting had been waiting to happen. Samuel looked back at Lily. "Perhaps," he said gently, "we can learn them together." Lily's face brightened with quiet excitement. "I'd like that very much." The three of them continued toward the hill, where the old observatory waited peacefully beneath the widening morning sky. Behind them, Starlight Wells carried on with another gentle day. Ahead of them, a place filled with old telescopes, forgotten journals, and countless memories was about to open its doors once again. The path to the observatory curved gently around the eastern side of the hill. It was not a difficult climb. The trail had been worn smooth by decades of quiet footsteps, its edges lined with desert grasses that swayed lightly whenever the morning breeze wandered across the hillside. Samuel walked beside Matteo while Lily skipped a few steps ahead, stopping every so often to admire a flower blooming between the rocks or a lizard warming itself in the morning sun. From higher on the hill, Starlight Wells appeared even smaller. The white adobe cottages clustered peacefully around the village square, their clay roofs glowing softly beneath the rising sun. Beyond them, The desert stretched toward distant mountains, fading into shades of pale blue where earth and sky seemed to meet. Samuel paused for a moment. "It feels," he said quietly, "as though the village was built to belong to the landscape, rather than to change it." Matteo smiled. That was the intention. He rested one hand on the wooden walking stick he carried. When the first families settled here nearly 80 years ago, they promised each other something. What was that? To leave the night sky exactly as they found it? Samuel looked at him with quiet interest. No tall lights? Matteo nodded. No bright signs? No unnecessary lamps? No reason for the stars to compete with us? Samuel let those words settle in his thoughts. During his career, he had watched observatories lose their darkness, one city light at a time. Entire constellations had slowly disappeared behind growing skylines. Yet here, people had chosen a different future. A future where darkness was protected, because it allowed the heavens to remain visible. After another few minutes, they reached the observatory. It stood upon the crest of the hill, like an old friend patiently watching over the village. The circular building was built from warm sandstone blocks, each one shaped by hand many decades earlier. Ivy climbed part way across the western wall, while climbing roses surrounded the entrance with small white blossoms. Above the heavy wooden doors rested a carved stone plaque. Starlight Observatory, established 1957. Samuel reached out and brushed his fingertips gently across the weathered letters. So many years. Matteo unlocked the doors with an old iron key. The hinges gave a soft creak. Not the sound of neglect, but of age. Cool air welcomed them inside. The observatory smelled faintly of cedar wood, polished brass, old paper, and the comforting dryness of books that had rested undisturbed for generations. Sunlight streamed through the tall eastern windows, illuminating tiny dust particles that floated lazily through the room like miniature stars suspended in daylight. Lily hurried toward one of the bookshelves. "I've already read almost every book on this shelf," she announced proudly. Matteo laughed. "Almost." Samuel wandered slowly through the room. Nothing here had been arranged to impress visitors. Everything existed because someone had loved using it. Along one wall stood shelves filled with astronomy journals, carefully labeled by year. Nearby rested wooden drawers containing handwritten star charts. Old photographs covered another wall. Black and white images showed smiling villagers gathered outside beneath meteor showers. Children looking through telescopes. Families wrapped in blankets during cool autumn nights. An elderly couple sharing coffee while watching a lunar eclipse. Samuel found himself smiling at each photograph. These people had never treated the stars as distant objects. They had treated them as lifelong neighbors. At the center of the observatory stood the telescope. It was magnificent, not because it was the largest Samuel had ever seen. Far from it. Compared to the giant instruments he had used throughout his career, this telescope was modest. But it possessed something those modern observatories often lacked. Character. Its long brass tube reflected the morning sunlight with a warm golden glow. The wooden tripod had been polished so many times that the grain shimmered beneath the light. Small brass knobs showed tiny scratches left by countless careful hands. Samuel approached almost reverently. He rested one hand against the smooth metal. Cool, solid, timeless. "It still works perfectly," Matteo said. "We clean the lenses every season." Samuel bent slightly. examining the finely crafted focusing wheel. Whoever had built this telescope had expected it to serve generations, and somehow it had. Lily stood beside him. "My favorite part isn't the telescope." "It isn't?" Samuel asked. She shook her head and pointed toward a small cabinet tucked into the corner of the room. Matteo smiled knowingly. "I thought she'd show you that." Inside the cabinet rested dozens of leather-bound journals. Each spine carried nothing more than a year. 1958, 1959, 1960, and so on. Nearly 7 decades of careful observations. Samuel gently removed the oldest volume. Its pages had yellowed with age, but the handwriting remained beautifully clear. The first entry was surprisingly simple. Tonight the sky was so clear that every child in the village forgot to count the hours. They counted only stars. Samuel read the sentence twice. It wasn't a scientific measurement. It wasn't filled with calculations or technical language. It was simply an observation about people, about wonder. He turned another page. Instead of charts alone, the journal contained small notes about village life. Mrs. Alvarez brought cinnamon bread for everyone during the eclipse. The children stayed awake longer than their parents to watch the Perseids. A little boy asked whether lonely stars become friends when they form constellations. Samuel laughed softly. He could almost imagine those evenings. Families gathered beneath blankets, hot chocolate warming their hands, children asking questions that no textbook could answer. He looked toward Matteo. "Who wrote these?" Matteo answered quietly. "Nearly everyone." Samuel blinked. "Everyone?" The observatory has never belonged to one astronomer. He looked around the peaceful room. "It belongs to the village." For several moments, no one spoke. Outside, a breeze brushed gently against the dome. Somewhere beyond the windows, a meadowlark began to sing. Samuel closed the journal with great care. He suddenly understood that this observatory had never been built simply to study the stars. It had been built to bring people together beneath them. And somehow, that seemed even more important. Samuel remained beside the old journals for a little while longer. He did not hurry to open another one. Some words deserved a moment of silence after they had been read. The observatory felt less like a scientific building now, and more like the heart of the village, a place where curiosity had quietly become tradition, passed from one generation to the next without ever demanding attention. Matteo walked toward a narrow spiral staircase leading upward. "There's one more place I'd like you to see." Samuel followed, while Lily came behind them, carefully carrying one of the journals back to its shelf before joining the others. The wooden steps curved gently toward the dome above. Every few steps, small windows offered wider views of the desert below. The farther they climbed, the farther the horizon seemed to stretch. When they reached the top, Matteo unlocked another weathered wooden door. A soft click echoed through the quiet room. He turned a polished brass wheel beside the wall. With a slow, familiar sound, the great dome began to rotate. Then, almost silently, a section of the roof slid open. Bright morning light poured inside. The opening framed a perfect circle of endless blue sky. Samuel instinctively looked upward. Even without stars, the sky possessed its own quiet beauty. Thin white clouds drifted lazily from west to east. A red-tailed hawk floated on invisible currents of warm air, hardly moving its wings. For several minutes, no one spoke. Finally, Matteo broke the silence. People often think this place exists only for the night. He looked toward the open sky. But every clear day begins here, too. Samuel nodded slowly. The sky never really changes shifts, he said with a gentle smile. It simply changes its colors. Lily sat cross-legged on the wooden floor beneath the opening. When I was younger, she said, I thought the stars disappeared every morning. And now? Samuel asked. She smiled. I think they're just waiting behind the sunlight. Samuel's eyes brightened. I couldn't have explained it more beautifully. Matteo chuckled. You'll discover that children often become the best astronomers. Not because they knew the most, because they never stopped wondering. They remained in the observatory until late morning. Samuel examined old star charts that had been drawn entirely by hand. He admired carefully restored telescopes that had served the village for decades. He listened as Matteo shared stories of meteor showers that had brought nearly every family to the hill, with blankets, lanterns, and homemade pie. None of the stories centered on records or discoveries. Instead, they spoke of neighbors, friendships, families, shared evenings beneath the stars. By noon, warm sunlight covered the hillside. The three of them began walking back toward the village. The path seemed even more welcoming than before, perhaps because it no longer led to an unfamiliar place. It led home. As they entered the village square, Eleanor stood outside the bakery, placing fresh flower pots beneath the windows. She looked up and smiled. So? Samuel laughed softly. I think you all forgot to mention something. Eleanor tilted her head. What was that? Your observatory doesn't only watch the stars. She nodded knowingly. No. It watches over the village. Samuel looked across the peaceful square. A delivery truck unloaded fresh vegetables outside the grocery. Two elderly friends played a slow game of chess beneath a cottonwood tree. Children's laughter drifted from the schoolyard before fading into the warm afternoon. Life here moved gently, but it never felt empty. Every ordinary moment carried quiet meaning. That afternoon, Samuel spent several hours arranging books inside his cottage. He placed Margaret's photograph beside the window, where the evening light would always reach it. His notebooks filled one shelf. His favorite astronomy books filled another. On the writing desk, he carefully positioned the polished telescope eyepieces that Matteo had given him. By late afternoon, the cottage no longer felt like a temporary stop. It felt lived in. Outside, shadows slowly lengthened across the village. The desert air cooled once again. Samuel stepped onto the porch with a cup of tea. Across the street, neighbors waved as they passed. A little farther away, Lily sat beneath the same mesquite tree, quietly sketching another constellation from memory. She noticed Samuel watching and held up her notebook with a proud smile. Without speaking, he gave her a small thumbs up. She grinned before returning to her drawing. The simple exchange filled Samuel with unexpected happiness. As sunset approached, the western sky became a masterpiece of soft gold, copper, and crimson. The sandstone hills reflected the changing colors until they seemed almost to glow from within. Samuel watched in complete stillness. He had spent years traveling the world in search of extraordinary skies. Yet somehow, this ordinary evening felt richer than many famous places he had visited. He reached for his leather notebook. After a moment of thought, he wrote, "Some places become unforgettable because of what we see. Others become unforgettable because of how they teach us to see. He closed the notebook and rested it on his lap. Above the eastern horizon, the first star appeared once more. Then another. Then another. The familiar rhythm of starlight wells had begun again. Samuel smiled toward the quiet sky. He understood now why Eleanor had said he would meet their stars. They did not belong to the village in any literal sense. They belonged to everyone who paused long enough to notice them. And perhaps that was the true gift of starlight wells. Not brighter stars, but slower evenings. Not grand discoveries, but quiet appreciation. As darkness settled gently across the desert, Samuel leaned back in his rocking chair. He listened to the wind chimes, to the distant laughter of neighbors finishing supper, to the peaceful silence that followed. Then, with a grateful heart, he made a simple promise to himself. He would not spend his days here chasing remarkable moments. He would learn to treasure the ordinary ones. For sometimes, the ordinary becomes extraordinary, simply because we are finally present enough to notice it. Above him, the stars continued to appear, one by one, until the entire sky shimmered with quiet light. And beneath that endless desert sky, the first chapter of Samuel Carter's new life came gently to its close. Morning arrived softly over starlight wells. The first rays of sunlight slipped across the sandstone hills, gently touching the rooftops before filling the village square with a warm golden glow. A cool breeze carried the scent of fresh bread from Eleanor's bakery, while birds welcomed the new day with cheerful songs from the mesquite trees. Samuel had already been awake for nearly an hour. After enjoying a quiet cup of tea on his porch, he had written a few lines in his notebook before taking a slow walk through the village. This morning felt different from yesterday. Yesterday, he had arrived as a visitor. Today, he was beginning to feel like a neighbor. As he crossed the village square, familiar faces greeted him with warm smiles. "Good morning, Samuel." "Morning, Doctor." He smiled and greeted each person in return. The names were still new to him, but the kindness already felt familiar. Outside the bakery, Eleanor was arranging baskets filled with warm loaves of bread. "Perfect timing," she said with a smile. "The cinnamon rolls have just come out of the oven." Samuel laughed softly. "I think I could get used to mornings like this." "You probably will," Eleanor replied. "Most people who come here do." Inside the bakery, a handful of villagers sat around a large wooden table, sharing breakfast and quiet conversation. No one seemed to be in a hurry to leave. Samuel accepted a cup of coffee and joined them. The conversation wandered from the weather to the blooming desert flowers, then to the upcoming autumn festival that the village celebrated every year beneath the stars. "There aren't any fireworks," one of the villagers explained. Samuel looked surprised. "No?" The man smiled. "We don't want anything brighter than the night sky." Everyone around the table nodded in agreement. Samuel couldn't help smiling. He was beginning to understand the heart of this village. After breakfast, Matteo stopped by the bakery carrying a folded map. "I have something to show you," he said. The map was old but carefully preserved. It showed the hills, trails, and surrounding desert, along with dozens of handwritten notes made over many years. "My grandfather started this map," Matteo explained. "Every spring, someone adds something new, a blooming cactus, a bird's nesting place, or a trail that has become easier to walk." Samuel studied the map with admiration. "It isn't just a map," he said. "It's the story of this land." Matteo nodded. "Exactly." Before they could continue, Lily came running into the bakery, holding a rolled-up drawing. "I finished it." She carefully opened the paper across the table. It showed the observatory, standing beneath a sky filled with stars. On the porch stood 3 small figures: Samuel, Matteo, and Lily herself. Above them, she had written in careful handwriting, "Every star has a story. Every story needs someone willing to look up." Samuel looked at the drawing for a long moment. "It belongs in the observatory," he said. Lily's eyes widened. "Really?" "It reminds people why the observatory exists." Her smile was brighter than the morning sunlight. Later that afternoon, Samuel helped Matteo hang the drawing inside the observatory's entrance hall. Visitors would see it before looking through the telescope. Not as a decoration, but as a quiet reminder. Sometimes the greatest discoveries begin with something as simple as looking toward the sky. As the afternoon slowly faded toward evening, Samuel realized something unexpected. For the first time since retiring, he had spent an entire day without thinking about deadlines, research papers, or unfinished work. Instead, he had shared breakfast with neighbors, walked old desert paths, encouraged a young dreamer. And somehow, those simple moments felt every bit as meaningful as the greatest achievements of his career. When he returned to his cottage, the first evening star was already waiting above the eastern horizon. Samuel smiled. The village was gently settling into another peaceful night. And little by little, so was he. By Friday evening, Samuel had begun to recognize the gentle rhythm of life in Starlight Wells. The village did not measure time by busy schedules. Instead, people looked forward to simple traditions that quietly brought everyone together. As the sun slipped behind the sandstone hills, families carried folding chairs and woven blankets toward the village square. Children helped light small lanterns along the stone paths, while the soft aroma of fresh bread and homemade soup drifted through the cool evening air. There was no stage, no loud music, no bright decorations, only neighbors gathering beneath an open sky. Samuel arrived carrying a small thermos of chamomile tea. Eleanor waved him over to a circle of friends, where Matteo was already pouring coffee into small enamel cups. "You made it," Eleanor said warmly. "I wouldn't have missed this," Samuel replied. Lily soon appeared with her sketchbook tucked under one arm. "I brought something new," she said with an excited smile. She opened the sketchbook to reveal several drawings of familiar constellations. Beside each one, she had written a short story inspired by the stars. Samuel carefully turned each page. "The drawings are beautiful," he said, "but what I like most are the stories." Lily looked surprised. "I thought you'd like the stars more." Samuel smiled. "The stars help us understand the universe. The stories help us understand each other." For a moment, no one spoke. The words seemed to settle gently among the group. As darkness deepened, more stars appeared overhead. Someone quietly pointed toward the eastern sky. "The summer triangle is rising." Several children looked up together. Samuel noticed something he had rarely seen in large cities. No one reached for a phone. No one hurried to take a photograph. They simply looked and quietly admired what was above them. A little later, Matteo invited everyone to the observatory hill. It had become a Friday tradition many years ago. The walk was slow, filled with easy conversations and comfortable silence. When they reached the hilltop, The old observatory stood beneath a sky overflowing with stars. The dome was already open. The brass telescope waited patiently in the center of the room. Instead of rushing to look through it, everyone first stepped outside. Blankets were spread across the ground. People lay back, watching the Milky Way stretch from one horizon to the other. Samuel rested beside Lily. She pointed toward a bright cluster of stars. Do you still discover new things when you look at the sky? Samuel thought for a moment. Every night. She looked puzzled. But you've studied the stars your whole life. I have, he answered. But every time I look up, I notice something I overlooked before. Lily smiled. So the sky is teaching you too. Samuel laughed softly. It never stopped. Later, each family took a turn looking through the old telescope. Children gasped as Saturn's rings came into view. Parents smiled just as brightly as their sons and daughters. Samuel watched quietly from the side. He realized that the telescope was doing far more than showing distant planets. It was creating shared memories. As the evening drew to a close, Eleanor handed Samuel a small cloth bag. Inside were freshly baked honey cookies. A Friday tradition, she explained. Everyone takes a little sweetness home. Samuel thanked her and slipped the bag into his coat pocket. The walk back through the village was peaceful. Lanterns glowed softly outside each cottage. A cool breeze wandered through the quiet streets. Somewhere in the distance, a wind chime sang gently. Standing on his porch, Samuel looked toward the observatory one last time before going inside. A few lights still glowed in its windows. He smiled. Not because he had found the perfect place to study the stars, but because he had found people who reminded him why he had fallen in love with them in the first place. That night, before closing his notebook, he wrote just one sentence. Wonder grows brightest when it is shared. He gently closed the cover, placed the notebook beside Margaret's photograph, and turned off the lamp. Outside, the stars continued their silent journey across the desert sky. And within the quiet village of Starlight Wells, another peaceful day came to its gentle end. A few days passed quietly in Starlight Wells. Samuel had begun to settle into a gentle routine. Each morning started with tea on the porch, followed by breakfast at Eleanor's bakery. In the afternoons, he often walked to the observatory, where Matteo was usually repairing a telescope, organizing old journals, or simply enjoying the peaceful view from the hill. One cool morning, Matteo was carefully dusting a wooden cabinet in the observatory's library. I found something you might enjoy, he said. He placed a small cedar box on the table. The box was old, its edges worn smooth by time. A tiny brass latch held the lid closed. It belonged to Professor Daniel Harper, Matteo explained. He founded this observatory almost 70 years ago. Samuel gently opened the box. Inside were neatly tied bundles of handwritten letters. Not scientific reports, not research papers, personal letters. The paper had faded to a warm golden color, but the handwriting remained clear and graceful. Samuel unfolded the first letter. It was addressed to the children of Starlight Wells. If you ever feel small beneath the night sky, remember this. The stars are not here to remind us how tiny we are. They are here to remind us how wonderful it is that we can look up and understand even a little of their story. Samuel read the words twice before quietly folding the letter again. "They're beautiful," he whispered. Matteo nodded. Professor Harper believed that astronomy should bring comfort before it brings answers. For the rest of the morning, Samuel read more of the letters. Some described meteor showers. Others spoke about patience, curiosity, and the joy of asking questions. One letter simply encouraged people to spend one evening each week without clocks, listening only to the sounds of nature. There was wisdom in every page, not complicated wisdom, the kind that quietly stayed with you. Around noon, Lily arrived carrying a basket of fresh lemons from her grandmother's garden. She noticed the letters immediately. "Are those Professor Harper's?" Samuel smiled. "They are. My grandmother used to say he never stopped teaching," Lily said. "Even after class. Especially after class." The three of them spent the afternoon reading a few letters together. Each one sparked a different conversation. Some made them laugh. Others filled the room with thoughtful silence. Before leaving, Samuel carefully returned every letter to the cedar box. He looked toward Matteo. "These shouldn't stay hidden in a cabinet." Matteo smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." An idea had quietly begun to take shape, one that would soon bring the entire village together once again. The following Friday evening, the observatory welcomed more visitors than usual. Word had quietly spread through the village that Samuel wanted to begin a new tradition. Nothing grand, nothing complicated, just an evening of shared stories beneath the stars. As the last light of day faded behind the hills, neighbors arrived carrying folding chairs, warm blankets, and steaming mugs of tea. The familiar sound of quiet greetings filled the observatory courtyard. Eleanor placed a basket of fresh bread on a wooden table. "I thought everyone might get hungry," she said with a smile. "No gathering is complete without your bread," Matteo replied. A few children laughed as they helped arrange the chairs into a circle. When everyone had settled, Samuel stepped forward, holding Professor Harper's cedar box. He looked around the room before speaking. "When I first came to Starlight Wells, I believed this observatory existed to help people understand the stars." He paused for a moment. "Now I think it exists for something even greater." The room became perfectly still. "It helps people understand one another." Several gentle smiles appeared around the circle. Samuel opened the cedar box and carefully unfolded one of the letters. His calm voice carried easily through the quiet observatory. Never believe that a peaceful evening is an ordinary thing. One day, you may discover that the evenings you almost ignored became the memories you treasured most. When he finished reading, no one spoke immediately. The silence did not feel uncomfortable. It felt meaningful. Finally, Eleanor smiled. "My father never missed a sunset," she said softly. "He used to finish work early every Friday, just so he could sit on the porch with my mother." Matteo nodded. "My grandfather planted that cottonwood tree in the village square." He pointed through the observatory window. "He always said someone would someday enjoy its shade, even if he never met them." Lily looked down at her sketchbook. "I think I'll draw that tree tomorrow." One by one, others began sharing their own memories. Some were joyful, some were bittersweet. Every story was simple. Every story mattered. As the conversations slowly came to an end, everyone stepped outside. The observatory dome stood open above them. The Milky Way stretched brilliantly across the desert sky. Samuel looked upward with quiet gratitude. For decades he had searched for distant galaxies through powerful telescopes. tonight. He barely looked through the telescope at all. Instead, he listened to laughter, to gentle conversations, to the peaceful silence that followed each story. He realized that this evening had given him something no observatory, no university, and no scientific award ever had: a true sense of belonging. Later, as the villagers began walking home beneath the stars, Lily stayed behind for a moment. She handed Samuel a folded piece of paper. "I made something for the cedar box," she said. After she left, Samuel opened it. It wasn't a drawing. It was a single sentence written carefully in pencil. "The stars shine for everyone, but they become unforgettable when someone shares them with you." Samuel smiled. Without hesitation, he placed Lily's note beside Professor Harper's letters. Different generations. The same quiet wisdom. Before locking the observatory for the night, Matteo looked toward Samuel. "I think Professor Harper would have liked this." Samuel closed the cedar box gently. "I hope so." Together, the two friends stepped outside. The lantern by the observatory door cast a warm circle of light across the stone path. Beyond it, the village rested peacefully beneath thousands of stars. And for the first time in many years, Samuel no longer felt that he had come to Starlight Wells to begin the final chapter of his life. Instead, it felt as though a beautiful new chapter had only just begun. Autumn settled gently over Starlight Wells. The mornings became cooler, and the evenings arrived a little earlier each day. Golden grasses swayed across the hills, while the cottonwood tree in the village square slowly exchanged its green leaves for shades of amber. One crisp morning, Eleanor pinned a handwritten notice to the bakery door. "The Festival of Falling Stars. This Saturday at sunset. Everyone is welcome." Samuel paused to read it. "I've heard everyone mention the festival," he said. "What makes it so special?" Eleanor smiled as she handed him a warm blueberry muffin. "We celebrate the Perseid meteor shower every year. But we don't come to make wishes." Samuel looked curious. "What do you come for?" "To remember how fortunate we are to share the same sky." Later that morning, the entire village quietly began preparing. Children collected smooth stones to line the walking paths leading to the observatory. Families washed old lanterns that would softly illuminate the trails after sunset. Long wooden tables were carried to the hilltop, where neighbors would later share homemade food. No one was assigned a task. Everyone simply noticed what needed to be done. Samuel spent the afternoon helping Matteo clean the observatory's brass telescope. As they polished the metal, the old instrument slowly regained its warm, golden shine. "It still amazes me," Samuel said, "how carefully this village protects everything." Matteo smiled. "We're not protecting objects. We're protecting memories." Those words stayed with Samuel for the rest of the afternoon. Before sunset, Lily climbed the hill, carrying a small wooden box. Inside were dozens of tiny paper stars. She had written a kind message on each one. Some read, "Thank you for your friendship." Others simply said, "Take time to look up." She planned to leave one on every chair before the festival began. As the sun disappeared behind the western hills, lanterns slowly came alive across the path to the observatory. Their soft, golden light guided families toward the hill without disturbing the growing darkness above. By the time the first stars appeared, the observatory grounds had filled with quiet conversation and gentle laughter. Children spread blankets across the grass. Older couples settled into folding chairs. Neighbors greeted one another as though welcoming old friends home. Samuel stood near the telescope, taking in the scene. Everything felt beautifully simple. No tickets, no advertisements, no loud announcements. Just people gathering beneath a sky they deeply respected. Eleanor rang a small brass bell. The conversations gradually faded. She smiled at the crowd. Welcome, everyone. For 70 years, this village has gathered beneath the stars, not because they belong to us, but because we are grateful they allow us to share their light. A peaceful silence followed. Above them, the Milky Way slowly brightened. The festival had begun. For a while, no one spoke. The village rested beneath a sky filled with countless stars, as if everyone had silently agreed that some moments were too beautiful to interrupt. A cool breeze drifted across the hill, carrying the comforting aroma of fresh bread, cinnamon, and warm apple pie from the long wooden tables nearby. Children lay on blankets, pointing at familiar constellations they had learned throughout the year. Parents listened with quiet smiles, sometimes letting the children become the teachers. Samuel noticed Lily helping a younger boy find the North Star. There, she whispered, guiding his finger toward the sky. Once you find that one, the others become easier. The boy's face lit up with excitement. I found it, Samuel smiled. Only a few weeks ago, Lily had been the one asking questions. Now she was sharing what she had learned. Just then, a bright streak of light crossed the northern sky. A meteor. It flashed for only a heartbeat before disappearing into the darkness. A gentle murmur of wonder spread through the crowd. Then another meteor appeared, and another. Soon, the heavens seemed alive with slow, graceful trails of light. No one rushed to make a wish. Instead, people simply watched. Every falling star was welcomed with quiet appreciation rather than excitement. Samuel leaned back in his chair and looked upward. He had witnessed meteor showers from mountain observatories, remote deserts, and research stations around the world. Yet none of those memories felt quite like this one. Tonight, the stars were not the only thing bringing light. The warmth of friendship, shared silence, and familiar faces made the evening unforgettable. After a while, Eleanor stood and placed a small wooden basket in the center of the gathering. Inside were the paper stars Lily had prepared. Before we go home, Eleanor said, I'd like everyone to take one. Not to keep forever, she added with a smile, but to carry until next year's festival. One by one, the villagers chose a paper star. When Samuel unfolded his, he found a simple, handwritten message. The brightest light is often the kindness we leave behind. He read it again, then carefully slipped it inside his notebook. It was the kind of sentence he knew he would return to many times. As the evening slowly came to an end, families began folding their blankets and extinguishing the lanterns. The hill grew quiet once more. Samuel, Matteo, Eleanor, and Lily remained for a few extra minutes, watching the final meteors cross the sky. Matteo broke the silence. I've attended this festival since I was a child. Samuel looked toward him. Does it ever become ordinary? Matteo smiled gently. Never. Because every year the stars are different. He paused before adding, and so are we. Samuel nodded. He understood exactly what his friend meant. The sky might appear unchanged, but the people looking up at it were always carrying new memories, new hopes, and a little more gratitude than the year before. Before leaving, Samuel turned for one last look at the observatory. The old brass telescope stood quietly beneath the open dome, waiting for another peaceful evening. He realized something that filled his heart with quiet joy. When he had first arrived in Starlight Wells, he believed he had come here to escape the noise of his old life. Now he knew the truth. He had not come here to escape anything. He had come here to discover a slower, richer way of living. Together, the four friends walked down the lantern-lit path toward the sleeping village. Above them, one final meteor crossed the night sky, leaving behind a brief silver trail before fading into the darkness. No one said a word. They simply smiled. Some endings do not need applause. They need only a peaceful sky and people willing to share it. The first signs of winter arrived without fanfare. The days grew shorter, and the desert mornings carried a gentle chill that encouraged everyone to wrap a warm sweater around their shoulders before stepping outside. The hills remained beautiful, but their colors softened beneath the pale winter sunlight. Samuel had now lived in Starlight Wells for several months. The village no longer felt unfamiliar. It felt like home. His mornings still began with tea on the porch, but now they were often followed by a friendly wave from neighbors walking to work, or by Lily stopping at the gate on her way to school. One morning, she held up a small notebook. "I've started my own observation journal," she said proudly. Samuel smiled. "What's your first entry?" Lily opened the notebook and read aloud. The stars looked brighter after the cold wind arrived. Samuel nodded with approval. That's exactly how every good scientist begins. By noticing something. She grinned before hurrying toward the schoolhouse. Later that day, Samuel walked to the observatory. Inside, Matteo was repairing an old wooden chair near the telescope. It finally gave up after 40 years, he joked. Samuel picked up a hammer. Then let's give it another 40. The two friends spent the afternoon working side by side. They talked very little. Neither of them felt the need to fill every quiet moment with conversation. By sunset, the chair stood sturdy once again. Matteo brushed the sawdust from his hands. "I think it's even stronger now." Samuel looked at the repaired chair. Some things become more valuable after they've been carefully restored. The words lingered in his mind long after they had finished. That evening, a light rain surprised the village. Rain was uncommon in the desert, and before long, people stepped onto their porches simply to enjoy its gentle rhythm. Samuel did the same. The scent of rain on warm desert soil filled the cool air. It reminded him of childhood summers he had almost forgotten. The next morning, tiny green shoots appeared among the rocks beside his cottage. Lily noticed them first. "Look," she said. The desert remembered how to bloom. Samuel looked down and smiled. Perhaps people were not so different. Sometimes all they needed was a little time and a little kindness before something beautiful quietly began to grow again. A week after the gentle rain, Samuel placed a small chalkboard outside the observatory. In careful handwriting, he wrote, "Evening Sky Club. Every Wednesday at sunset, everyone welcome." He had expected only a few children. Instead, nearly a dozen arrived that evening, carrying notebooks, pencils, and endless curiosity. Lily smiled proudly. "I told everyone they didn't need to know anything about the stars." Samuel laughed. "That's true. The only thing you need is the willingness to look up." The children gathered in a circle while the sky slowly darkened. Instead of beginning with constellations, Samuel asked a simple question. What do you notice first when you look at the night sky? One child answered, the brightest star. Another said, the moon. A little girl quietly replied, the silence. Samuel nodded with a warm smile. There are no wrong answers. Every person notices something different. As the first stars appeared, he showed them how to find the Big Dipper and how it could guide them to the North Star. Soon the children were discovering patterns on their own, excitedly pointing toward the sky and comparing what they saw. Matteo watched from the observatory steps. It reminds me of Professor Harper, he said softly. He always believed curiosity should feel like an adventure. Later, Samuel opened the cedar box and read one of Professor Harper's letters. It ended with a simple thought. Knowledge becomes wisdom only when it is shared with kindness. The children sat quietly for a moment. Then Lily closed her notebook. I think that's why this club matters. Samuel looked at her. Why? Because you're not only teaching us about the stars, you're teaching us to notice the world. Her words stayed with Samuel long after the children had gone home. That night, as he walked back through the peaceful village, warm light glowed from cottage windows, and laughter drifted softly through the cool evening air. He realized that for many years he had measured success by the number of papers he had published or lectures he had given. Now, success felt wonderfully different. It was seeing a child discover a constellation for the first time. It was watching neighbors gather without needing a special reason. It was ending the day with a grateful heart. When Samuel reached his porch, he looked toward the observatory on the hill. Its lantern was still shining gently against the darkness. He smiled. The evening sky club had only just begun, but he had a feeling its brightest nights were still ahead. Winter settled peacefully over Starlight Wells. The desert remained dry, but the mornings were crisp, and a silver frost sometimes appeared on the grass before sunrise. Smoke rose gently from cottage chimneys, and warm lights glowed behind windows long before dawn. The evening sky club had become a beloved part of the village. Every Wednesday, children climbed the hill with notebooks tucked beneath their arms. Some came to learn about the stars, while others simply enjoyed spending time together beneath the open sky. One evening, after the lesson had ended, Lily stayed behind. She looked unusually thoughtful. Samuel, she asked quietly, why did you become an astronomer? Samuel looked toward the stars before answering. When I was about your age, my father took me camping far from the city. It was the first truly dark sky I had ever seen. He smiled at the memory. I don't remember everything he said that night. I only remember how I felt. What did you feel? Lily asked. Wonder. And I spent the rest of my life trying to hold on to that feeling. Lily nodded slowly. I think I understand. The following morning, Samuel found a small envelope resting on his porch. There was no name on it. Inside was a handwritten note. Thank you for helping our children fall in love with the night sky again. Nothing more. No signature. Samuel folded the letter carefully and placed it inside his notebook. Some gifts did not need a name. Later that week, Matteo suggested an idea. The observatory library has one empty shelf. Samuel looked around. It does. I think it should become something special. Together they placed a simple wooden sign above the shelf. Stories that changed our lives. Instead of scientific books, villagers began placing their favorite books there. Some were novels. Some were collections of poems. Others were journals filled with personal memories. Each book carried a small handwritten note explaining why it mattered. Within days, the shelf was full. Samuel borrowed one at random. Inside the cover, someone had written, "This book reminded me that kindness is never wasted." He smiled. The observatory was changing again. Not by becoming larger, but by becoming warmer. One quiet afternoon, Samuel sat alone beneath the cottonwood tree in the village square. Children played nearby while neighbors greeted one another on their way home. He realized something that surprised him. For the first time in many years, he wasn't thinking about the future. He wasn't thinking about the past either. He was completely present. The sound of children laughing, the breeze moving through the branches, the warmth of the afternoon sun. It was enough. Perhaps that, he thought, was what peace truly meant. Not having a perfect life, simply appreciating the one already before you. As evening approached, the first stars quietly appeared above Starlight Wells once again. Samuel looked up and smiled. Some lights shine because they are far away. Others shine because they are close enough to warm the heart. He was grateful that, at this stage of his life, he had finally learned the difference. A few days later, the village mail carrier stopped outside Samuel's cottage. "I have something for you," he said, handing over a neatly addressed envelope. The return address belonged to the university where Samuel had taught for more than 30 years. Inside was a warm letter from one of his former colleagues. The university was celebrating the anniversary of its astronomy department, and they hoped Samuel would return as the guest speaker for the occasion. He read the letter twice. It brought back memories of lecture halls, observatories, and students whose curiosity had filled every classroom. That evening, Samuel carried the letter to the observatory. Matteo was adjusting the telescope, while Eleanor poured tea into 3 small cups. Without saying a word, Samuel handed them the invitation. After reading it, Eleanor smiled. "They still remember you." Samuel nodded. "I never imagined they would ask me to come back." Matteo looked toward the open dome above. "Will you go?" Samuel was quiet for a moment. "I don't know." The following Wednesday, the Evening Sky Club gathered as usual. After the lesson, Lily noticed the folded letter resting beside Samuel's notebook. "Is something worrying you?" she asked. Samuel smiled gently. "Not worrying. Just giving me something to think about." He told the children about the invitation. One boy asked excitedly, "Does that mean you'll become a professor again?" Samuel laughed softly. "I've never really stopped being one." Then Lily asked a different question. "If you leave, will you come back?" The hill became very quiet. Samuel looked around at the observatory, the children, and the familiar faces waiting for his answer. Finally, he smiled. "I will always be happy to visit old places." He paused before continuing. "But home is the place your heart is eager to return to." Lily's smile said everything. She already knew the answer. A week later, Samuel wrote his reply to the university. He thanked them for the invitation and wished everyone a wonderful celebration. Then he added one final paragraph. "For many years, I believed my greatest classroom was a university lecture hall. Today, my classroom is a quiet observatory in a small desert village. where curious children still remind me why I first fell in love with the stars. I hope you will understand why I have chosen to stay." He sealed the envelope with a peaceful heart. There was no sadness, only gratitude. That evening, Samuel walked to the observatory, carrying a small box. Inside were several astronomy books from his personal collection. He placed them on the community bookshelf beneath the sign, "Stories that Changed Our Lives." Matteo looked at the books and smiled. "Sharing them?" Samuel nodded. Books become happier when they're read. Outside, the evening sky slowly filled with stars. The children arrived for another meeting of the Evening Sky Club. As Samuel began speaking, he realized he had not given anything up by staying in Starlight Wells. Instead, he had found exactly where he was meant to be. And beneath the quiet desert sky, surrounded by friends who had become family, that simple truth felt brighter than any star he had ever studied. Spring returned to Starlight Wells with quiet confidence. Tiny desert flowers bloomed between the rocks, and the hills were touched with soft shades of green after the winter rains. The village seemed to breathe a little deeper, welcoming another season beneath its endless sky. Nearly a year had passed since Samuel first drove along the lonely desert road and arrived in the village. What had once felt unfamiliar had become wonderfully ordinary. Each morning, he greeted the baker before sunrise. Each Wednesday, children's laughter filled the observatory. Each Friday evening, neighbors gathered beneath the stars with tea, bread, and stories. The rhythm of Starlight Wells had quietly become the rhythm of Samuel's own life. One afternoon, Matteo unlocked a small storage room beneath the observatory. "There are boxes here that no one has opened for years," he said. Together they carefully carried them into the library. Inside were hundreds of old photographs. Some showed the observatory when it was first built. Others captured village festivals, meteor showers, and children peering through the brass telescope decades earlier. Samuel smiled as he turned each page. The faces changed from one generation to the next. The smiles did not. Lily, now taller than when Samuel had first met her, looked through the photographs with amazement. "Some of these children are grandparents now." "They are," Matteo replied, "and they still come here to watch the stars." That simple thought filled Samuel with hope. Places could survive for generations if people continued to care for them together. An idea soon began to grow. "What if we create a permanent gallery?" Samuel suggested. A place where every family can share one photograph and one memory. Within days, the entire village joined the project. Old picture frames were cleaned and repaired. Children carefully wrote labels beneath each photograph. Eleanor baked fresh bread for the volunteers working late into the afternoon. No one was paid. No one expected anything in return. They simply wanted future generations to know the story of their village. When the gallery was finished, it stretched along the observatory hallway. Visitors could slowly walk through 70 years of shared memories. At the end of the display stood one empty frame. Lily noticed it immediately. "Did we forget a picture?" Samuel smiled. "No." "That frame belongs to the future." She looked puzzled. "The people who come after us will decide what belongs there." Lily looked at the empty frame for a long moment. Then she quietly nodded. Some stories, she realized, had not been written yet. That evening, the villagers gathered to see the completed gallery. There were smiles, a few tears, and many quiet moments as families rediscovered memories they had almost forgotten. Samuel stepped back and watched from the corner of the room. No one noticed, and he was perfectly happy with that. The gallery was never meant to celebrate one person. It celebrated a community. As darkness settled outside, everyone walked together onto the observatory lawn. The stars slowly appeared, just as they always had. Samuel looked upward with a peaceful heart. The sky above Starlight Wells had not changed since the day he arrived, but he had. And perhaps that was the greatest journey of all. A few weeks after the gallery opened, visitors from nearby towns began arriving at Starlight Observatory. They came to see the old brass telescope, the photographs, and Professor Harper's letters. But before long, they discovered that the observatory offered something even more valuable: time. People slowed their footsteps. They lowered their voices. They stayed longer than they had planned. Samuel noticed the change with quiet satisfaction. One afternoon, a young couple thanked him before leaving. "We almost drove past this village," the woman said. "We're glad we didn't." Samuel smiled. "So am I." After they left, Lily looked toward the road disappearing into the desert. "Do you think more people will come?" "Perhaps," Samuel replied. "But I hope the village never loses what makes it special." Matteo nodded in agreement. "Some places grow larger. I'd rather this one grows kinder." As spring turned to early summer, the Evening Sky Club welcomed its first new group of children. The older members naturally began helping the younger ones. Lily showed them how to find the North Star. Another child explained the phases of the moon. Samuel watched quietly from the observatory steps. He realized something wonderful. The lessons no longer depended on him alone. They were being passed from one child to another, just as Professor Harper had once hoped. That evening, Samuel gathered everyone inside the observatory. He carried the cedar box to the center of the room. "There is one last thing I'd like to add," he said. From his coat pocket, he removed his old leather notebook, the same notebook that had traveled with him throughout his career. Its pages held years of observations, quiet thoughts, and memories gathered beneath skies around the world. He placed it gently inside the cedar box. The children looked surprised. Lily spoke first. "Are you giving it away?" Samuel smiled. "I'm giving it forward." He opened the final page. Only one sentence had been written there. "The stars belong to no one, yet they have enough light to inspire everyone." He closed the notebook and looked around the room. "One day, someone else will continue writing where I have stopped." The children nodded quietly. They understood that they were receiving more than a notebook. They were receiving trust. As the meeting ended, everyone stepped outside. The first stars were already shining above the observatory. A familiar breeze moved gently across the hill. Samuel stood beside Matteo and Eleanor, watching the children laugh as they searched for constellations on their own. "You've changed this place," Matteo said. Samuel shook his head. "No. This place changed me." The three friends smiled without saying another word. Some truths needed nothing more. Far across the darkening desert, the last light of sunset disappeared beyond the hills. One by one, the stars filled the sky, just as they had yesterday, just as they would tomorrow. And Samuel knew, with complete peace in his heart, that the brightest legacy anyone could leave behind was never found in books, buildings, or awards. It lived quietly in people, in the kindness they shared, in the curiosity they encouraged, and in the hope they passed from one generation to the next. Beneath the endless sky of starlight wells, that legacy had already begun to shine. 1 year passed quietly in Starlight Wells. The seasons had come and gone, yet the village had remained true to itself. The bakery still filled the morning air with the scent of fresh bread. The observatory still opened its dome every clear evening. Children still laughed beneath the cottonwood tree, and neighbors still paused to greet one another by name. For Samuel, time no longer felt like something rushing past. It felt like something to be appreciated. On the anniversary of his arrival, Eleanor invited the entire village to the observatory. "There should be no speeches tonight," she announced with a smile. "We've listened to enough words this year." Everyone laughed. Instead of chairs, they spread blankets across the hillside, just as they had done during the Festival of Falling Stars. A simple dinner was shared beneath the open sky. Fresh bread, warm soup, apple pie, hot tea. Nothing extravagant. Everything made with care. As darkness settled, Matteo opened the great dome of the observatory one final time that evening. The old brass telescope pointed toward the heavens, but very few people looked through it. They had learned that sometimes the greatest beauty needed no lens at all. Lily, now more confident than ever, stood before the children with her own notebook in hand. She pointed toward the northern sky and began telling the story of the constellations, just as Samuel had once done for her. Samuel listened from a short distance away. He didn't interrupt. He didn't correct a single word. When she finished, the children applauded softly. Matteo leaned toward Samuel. "I think you've just become unnecessary." Samuel laughed. "I've never been happier to hear that." For a teacher, there was no greater success than watching a student become a guide for others. A little later, Eleanor carried the old cedar box into the center of the gathering. She carefully removed Professor Harper's letters. Then she added Samuel's notebook beside them. "2 generations," she said quietly, "but one shared purpose." Lily gently closed the lid. "Not the end," she whispered. "The beginning." Above them, a bright meteor crossed the sky. No one made a wish. They simply watched until its silver trail disappeared into the darkness. The silence that followed felt full rather than empty. Samuel closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered the day he had first driven across the desert. He had come searching for darker skies. Instead, he had found brighter hearts. He had come hoping to enjoy a peaceful retirement. Instead, he had discovered a new family. He had come believing he was reaching the final chapter of his life. Instead, he had opened another beautiful beginning. As the evening drew to a close, the villagers slowly began walking home, with lanterns glowing softly along the paths. Samuel remained behind for a few extra minutes. He looked once more at the observatory, at the quiet village below, at the endless sky above. Then he opened his notebook one final time. There was only one empty page remaining. He smiled and wrote, "A life is not measured by the years we collect. It is measured by the moments we share. If you ever find yourself beneath a sky filled with stars, pause for a while. Look up. Someone before you did the same. Someone after you will do it again. And in that quiet connection, none of us are ever truly alone." He gently tore out the page and placed it inside the cedar box. Then he closed the lid, not as a farewell, but as a gift to someone he would probably never meet. The lantern beside the observatory door flickered softly in the cool desert breeze. Far beyond the village, a lone car traveled slowly along the winding road. Its headlights moved through the darkness, drawing closer with every passing mile. Perhaps another traveler was searching for a peaceful place. Perhaps another tired heart was looking for a slower way of living. The people of Starlight Wells did not know the visitor's name. They did not need to. They would welcome them with warm bread, a quiet smile, and an endless sky full of stars, because that was what the village had always done, and what it always would. High above the silent desert, thousands of stars continued shining with the same gentle light they had shared for countless generations. They asked for nothing. They hurried nowhere. They simply reminded everyone below that beauty does not need to be loud to be unforgettable. And somewhere beneath that endless sky, in a small village where kindness was a tradition, and every evening invited people to look up, life continued at its own peaceful rhythm. The stars never faded. They simply waited for the next pair of eyes willing to see them, willing to